I'm Nimisha Mahuvakar. I lead product marketing for HCX services. And today I'll be presenting with Sachin.
Hi, my name is Sachin Thakkar. I'm in the R&D team. I lead the engineering team for HCX.
So today we are going to talk about HCX, few of the customer use cases. You will see a live demo of HCX and hope we cross our fingers. Everything goes good for the live demo. You know how it goes. We'll check it out and we'll have question answers at the end of the session. Hope you get the best out of this 1 hour that you spend with us, and hope you get to know what HCX is about. And we would like to understand your scenarios of where you are in your data centers and migrations and cloud and your destinations of your data center. So as we go forward, hope we get to know you as well. So oftentimes I talk to customers and they come about and they ask questions. We would like to go to private cloud. We would like to just move the traffic from on-premises to latest SDDC. And sometimes they say we want to go to public cloud. What can you do for us? So we start our questions understanding their scenarios of what is their size of data center, how much would they like to move, how many VMs are they looking at, what kind of connection they have. And as we speak, we come across a lot of two different distinct types of issues that they bring up. One would be about their own setup, and the other is about their hesitation to move to cloud. The reason being, in their present data center, they have everything working. They have figured out their business processes, they have figured out what they want to do, and everything is going nice. And here they are trying to either evacuate the data center or extend it, or they want to modernize it for one reason or the other. And they are concerned because they are going to go through a change. So here, with those kind of concerns that we come across, we end up figuring out exactly what will help them. What are the things that we need to do to help them achieve their own goals? Some of the concerns that we hear about are what is kind of connectivity should I have? What kind of connectivity should I have? What will happen to my networks of on-premises? How do I get them onto the other side? What about my IP pools? I've just got around doing my IP management, IP address management. How am I going to tackle those? I have X number of VMs and I'm not sure if I want to move all of them to cloud or all of them to on-premises. How do I have a common process, common set of tools to do all that? And those all are very, very valid issues that we come across. For that, to tackle some of those issues efficiently, we have introduced HCX. One would think HCX is just nothing else but a connect and do vMotion, and we are done, but that's not what HCX is about. HCX is designed to help customers do the migration to private or public cloud as efficiently as is possible. HCX does that by two different things that we have brought onto the market. One is an accelerated way to mobilize your apps to cloud, which we call app mobility, which helps you migrate thousands of VMs live into private cloud or public cloud. The second thing that we have brought about is what we call hybridity. Hybridity is a WAN optimized network extension which is traffic engineered. It is multi-site, it is bidirectional, and you can go ahead and have that interconnect between multiple sites to create a kind of hybrid highway. So let's jump in a little bit and get to know HCX a little bit more. So HCX has infrastructure hybridity, which helps tether the cloud, private or public, to your on-premises. One of the myth that we hear in the market is that migration is just one-time activity, and once we migrate, this is just migration tool, but that's not what customers experience. What customers would like to do is have a connection between on-premises and the cloud. And they would like to migrate it at their own pace as and when they want to, with complete continuity between complete business continuity for their migration. So HCX infrastructure hybridity tethers the cloud to the on-premises. App mobility helps migrate thousands of VM live, and all of this are done with operational automation. We set up the VPNs automatically, so as soon as you start the product, you don't have to go ahead and do the pairing and set up the VPN. What we do is we set up the VPN automatically, we do the site pairing, we help maintain the IP addresses, what you have on premises, onto the cloud, private or public. We help you stretch your networks from on premises onto the cloud, private or public. And everything is done automatically so that you do not need to redesign or you do not need to re-architecture your networks, nor do you need to retrofit. So instead of doing shift and lift, which is most migration tools' goal, what we help you do is shift and transform. You can go from 5.5 plus to any latest SDDC to do live migration, or you can go 5.0 plus to any SDDC to do bulk warm migration. Your choice. We help you do transformation. So why would you like to upgrade when you can just migrate with the transformation? So we call it shift and transform. That's what we provide. So how does HCX do that? So here is the normal infrastructure setup where you have legacy data center with 5.0 plus on premises, and you have different mandates. Probably you want to modernize the data center, or you want to move to public cloud on our partner clouds such as IBM, OVH, and so on. And you may choose to move to VMware Cloud on AWS. What does HCX do first? HCX goes ahead and abstracts the data center. It does the site pairing, it connects through NSX Hybrid Connect, and it goes ahead and abstracts all the data centers and its resources. With this abstraction, it goes ahead and over that, it builds the hybridity pathway. So we call it hybrid highway, on which you can connect any kind of cloud, private, public, on-premises, legacy, multiple sites, whatever you may have, and it would go ahead and create a kind of connection, which is everything that we mentioned so far, WAN optimized, traffic engineered, and so on. With this hybrid highway, the apps are oblivious, and the abstraction, of course, hybridity and abstraction, the apps become oblivious of where the VMs are residing. VMs can be on premises or they can be in the cloud. As far as the apps go, their view to the world is going to remain the same. Since IP address is not changed, networks do not change, you do not need any kind of redesign, apps remain oblivious whether you go ingress to a cloud or you go out of it. And HCX provides this hybridity connections which are bidirectional. So over this hybridity, we do the app mobility, and there are multiple ways you can migrate your traffic over with HCX. We'll be going through all different ways you can migrate into the cloud with Sachin in few seconds. If you would like to know more about the kind of issues that we deal with in detail, I would highly recommend on Wednesday at 9 a.m. there is a session by my colleagues, Debashis and Andy. They'll be going through similar scenarios in detail as well. So I highly recommend that you check that out and to understand exact issues that we deal with. And here I would like to invite Sachin to show us what are the ways we can migrate. Followed by that, Sachin, are you going to give us a live demo?
Live demo. So my 8th year at VMworld, and I say if it's not live, it's not real. So we're going to do a live demo here in a few minutes. But before we do that, we're actually going to jump through what are some of the migration technologies, right? I'll give you a quick overview, and then we'll jump into the actual live system and we'll take a look at it. And I have my live demo queued up here, so we'll switch over in just a second. So HCX actually offers a multitude of migration options. And as Nimisha was alluding to, from your migration scenarios, whether if you're going from a legacy vSphere environment, with your 5.0 or 5.5, which just recently went end of life, and you're trying to modernize into your own private cloud, maybe to a 6.5 or a VCF-based 6.7 based infrastructure, or if you're moving to the cloud, right, either with one of our VMware Cloud provider partners or with VMware Cloud on AWS, there's a multitude of options, and in either of these, you want to have a similar operational model, and you don't want to actually impact your applications. So that's the fundamental premise around HCX. So one of the migration technologies that we offer is what we call large-scale bulk migration. What this actually allows you to do is have a multitude of VMs move in a single migration wave where you can have a couple of different options. You can either say, replicate the data while the VM is still up and running on the source, and immediately switch it over as soon as the data is replicated. And you could have a wave of 50 VMs, 100 VMs, 200 VMs if you really wish. Or you can actually schedule this. Now, this is something that oftentimes our customers really appreciate, right? You're going to have your maintenance window that's coming up, maybe your following weekend. You'll want to actually schedule that migration. So you can actually have the data transfer begin now, but actually schedule your migration, let's say in your next maintenance window, whenever that may be. You can also choose to cancel, reschedule, and all of the other operational kinds of aspects that you would need for a given migration wave. This is, again, great for mass migrations, right? In general, actually, what you'll see is with all of the HCX migration technologies, this is not really meant for 1 or 2 or 10 VMs. This is for data center evacuation scenarios or large-scale data center migration. And in the use cases, we'll see some customer examples in the tail end of the presentation where we've had customers move tens of thousands of VMs between their own private cloud sites and to the public cloud. Now, bulk migration is also great because it's ultra compatible. It allows you to actually go back down to vSphere 5.0 and actually move, let's say, straight from 5.0 to a 6.7 based infrastructure without actually having to retrofit the application, right? And you don't actually need any additional software. You don't need NSX. You don't need any other software on the source site, right? Because back in 5.0 or 5.5 even, NSX really didn't exist. That's really a recent SDDC phenomenon. And you want to actually modernize your data center to actually be able to leverage NSX, to leverage vSAN, et cetera. Now, you may have apps that say, okay, I just don't know what's running within them, or I just can't afford to have any downtime. And for that, we have hybrid vMotion. Now, VMware's had vMotion for many, many years, right? And we've had the ability to vMotion between clusters. I believe in vSphere 6.0, we released the ability to vMotion across vCenters. So what does HCX bring over and above that? Well, a few things, I would say. HCX allows you to go across versions. So it allows you to actually migrate from, let's say, vSphere 5.5 directly to your 6.5 or 6.7 based estate. Now that's nice because we're actually able to stretch the boundaries of EVC, right? So we all know that VMware EVC does allow you to migrate, but it actually dumbs down your cluster to a lowest common denominator. So what HCX's infrastructure proxies allow you to do is abstract out both the software infrastructure from a vSphere perspective and the hardware infrastructure so you can actually attain that ultimate app portability. So for that, you can actually migrate, for example, from, let's say, a Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge based Intel chipset, something that's old, to something maybe newer, right? Skylake, Broadwell, what have you, without actually having to dumb down your vSphere cluster with something like EVC, because we can actually migrate that live with vMotion between the old and the new. Some other niceties here are allowing us to abstract the hardware infrastructure and the network infrastructure between our sites, right? So one of the key things is that vSphere is buried traditionally deep within the heart of our data center, right? We have our vMotion VMK NICs that are numbered out of maybe our 10/8 space. And there's going to be a variety of constraints. You don't want to necessarily say just to vMotion, I need to have route reachability from my source VMK NIC to my target. And you don't also want to say, well, I need to re-IP my host infrastructure just to migrate, right? Those are kind of no-nos because now you are letting your old infrastructure bleed over into your new, or you're having to go through a lot of transformation just to migrate your apps. What the HCX philosophy is we want to proxy that traffic that allows us to get the cross-version compatibility and abstract that infrastructure from the source and the target, allowing us to have a more secured pipeline, while of course the data is still encrypted with Sweet B crypto in flight. Now, one new feature we've just recently announced, and we launched this at VMworld US a couple months ago, is replication-assisted vMotion, right? We have our bulk migration, which I talked about, which is kind of a warm migration, right? You're syncing the data, then when the data is synced, it's actually doing a cutover. It'll actually quiesce, shut down the OS on the source side, it'll boot it on the target side. The vMotion, of course, is the same vMotion we know and love, right? It's no downtime, you know, one ping loss or whatever vMotion actually allows you to do even on your source site, you can do across sites. What replication-assisted vMotion does is allow you to bring together the best of both worlds. And what that is it allows you to have a large-scale bulk replication of the data, and then actually rather than do a shutdown and a reboot, you can actually do the vMotion finish. And so this allows you to effectively have disaster avoidance, right? You can actually have large-scale replications and then say, no, I'm not going to reboot the VM. I'm actually just going to do a vMotion for that delta and finish the migration. And so again, you get the same semantics of no downtime, but however in bulk. So you can almost think of this as bulk vMotion, if you will. Now, this is something that's available only in our VMware Cloud on AWS offering. This is a feature that we actually partnered with the vSphere team on, and that's actually available in a newer version of vSphere, which is why it's available on VMC first. This is actually something that we're working with our colleagues in the vSphere team to actually make available in a 6.5 and 6.7 update. And of course, the next versions of vSphere that ship to our private cloud data centers will also have it. So let's take a quick look here. Let's actually go through a live environment where we can actually go through the HCX system. So in this case, we see here I have a vSphere client, and I have my HCX tile that's shown up here in my H5 client here. Now, if I was on vSphere 5.5 or older versions of vSphere, I would be able to consume the same UI through my Flex client, you know, through the Flash client, or if I were on a much older version of vSphere where it was still the thick client, you can launch it as a standalone UI in your browser, for example. And I can actually launch HCX. So when I launch HCX here, I'll actually first see my dashboard. Now, my dashboard is actually showing me my sites, right? Now, as we had kind of talked about earlier, this is actually a tool that's catered towards large-scale migrations. Now, it's not just old to new. It's saying I'm going to move from my 5.0 estate to my 6.7 estate, but what's new today is going to be old again, you know, 2-3 years from now, or I may just want to rebalance continuously for a variety of business reasons. In any of these scenarios, we actually want the same operational model. So what we see here is actually a dashboard that shows us, of course, the total number of VMs migrated. I currently have no VM migrations in progress or none scheduled, and I have a few networks extended. Now, what I see here, this is actually a physical data center demo environment that I have. This is actually going over the internet. And we'll talk through that when we get into the deep dive in just a minute. What is the connectivity needs that HCX needs to, that HCX requires for migration? So I actually have my source site here, which is in Las Vegas. I have one endpoint which is actually connected to our VMware Cloud on AWS offering out in VMC in US West. And I actually have another physical private cloud site that's based out of Dallas. So this is actually a multi-site system. So what HCX actually allows you to do is you can do actually data center consolidation, and it's kind of an any-to-any kind of connectivity, right? I can have a single site that's going to multiple clouds. A cloud can actually be ingesting workloads from multiple source sites as well. This is also very important because as you're doing, let's say, data center consolidation, your legacy sites, you may need a multitude of those, and you can consolidate them as hardware is improved and your consolidation ratios have increased over time. So in this case, I see my two site pairings, and we actually see some operational stats, right? I see some migration statistics. What is my migration progress over the last 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? Now, this is my demo environment, so it's been, you know, tapering off as we got into VMworld season and all of that. If we were doing a real data center evacuation, we would actually see this ramping up as you, let's say, right-size your waves and you get progressively more aggressive as your migration deadlines reach. And now last but not least, we have some resource utilization, some alerts and alarms, and activity logs. So one premise here is HCX has tried to ensure that we're very loosely coupled, right? So we don't want to have any tight dependencies with the source or the target site. And what I mean by that is we can interoperate, as we've said, across versions. We also don't want to have a hard dependency with things like SSO, right? So you may be going from legacy, SSO in your vSphere 5.0 or 5.5 to a PSC-based solution. You may be going from an external PSC to an embedded with the latest, 6.7 update releases, et cetera. There's a multitude of options there. Our whole premise here is we want to be able to federate the identity so we can say who's doing what to whom, on which VM, when, et cetera, but without having a tight coupling between our SSO domains. That's something that's always been a pain point, of course, for our vSphere admins. So what we'll do here is we'll actually step through what has actually been set up in this infrastructure. So the first thing that we've set up here is actually our HCX interconnects. And now we're not going to step through this. We'll actually jump through the punchline of actually doing a migration. But this is actually very important for our infrastructure underlay. And what we see here is we've actually enabled a number of services. Now the services are bidirectionally enabled. And we'll see what that means in a set of slides here in just a minute. But that allows us to actually have layer 2 extension, a WAN optimized, encrypted set of migration proxies that's bootstrapped on the source site to our target site so that our VMs kind of have safe passage to the target. And then of course, one of the key things that unlocks all of this is not having to change the identity of the workloads, right? And so we have network extension built into our software here, which allows us a high throughput connectivity, so you don't need to re-IP or re-MAC or change the search of your workloads. You can actually move the VMs as is, like for like, between source and target. And that's huge because that allows us to ensure that we can kind of shift and transform and upgrade, let's say, virtual hardware version, upgrade VMware tools. Maybe I'm adopting NSX as I'm migrating, but I'm not actually having to impact the application itself, right? I can move from maybe a VLAN-based infrastructure into a NSX logical switch, either VXLAN or Geneve network on our target site, and the VMs are not impacted whatsoever. Same goes if I'm, let's say, moving from NSXV to NSXT. I can connect disparate domains and migrate between my sites without actually impacting my applications. So let's jump through actually some of our migration screens here. So I'm going to launch our migration wizard. Now I can do this in a number of ways, right? I can launch it here through our migration UI, where I'm actually going to go ahead and pick an endpoint. Or I can actually go through our hosts and clusters view, where I can actually go through a right-click action on either, let's say, a port group or on a VM itself and say, migrate to a target site, and there'll be a set of hybridity actions there. In this scenario, I'm going to launch it from this migration wizard. And what we'll see here is I, of course, picked the site pairing, right? We had 2 sites that we had paired up. Now, one thing I'll highlight here is that this is actually a bidirectional migration tool, right? And so what that means is you can actually move the VMs to your new target site. You can also pull them back, and that's a great fallback mechanism. Let's say you need to roll back a specific change for whatever reason, or you actually want to have bidirectional mobility. So this is not a one-way kind of route to cloud or what have you. This is actually a bidirectional migration capability. Now I'm going to go through our infrastructure-based views here, right? And I'm going to say I'm going to migrate, let's say, my database server pool, right? And I can actually go ahead and I can kind of multi-select all of the workloads in this pool, or I can go through and actually select one by one, right? And actually have cascading defaults up here, which will allow me to choose any of the specifics that will actually apply to all of the below, or I can have per VM level overrides, right? So I'm going to go ahead and choose a few options here, right? So I'm going to choose a folder. I'm going to choose my destination container. I'm going to go to the compute resource pool here. Now, you can also choose to actually transform some of your applications as you move, right? So let's say you're having storage issues on your source. You can actually say, I want to transform my storage. I want to go from thick provision to thin provision, or vice versa if you were over allocated storage, et cetera. These are all options that are just clicks of a button in the migration wizard. Now, we'll notice here, because I've actually extended these networks, it's automatically mapped. Extending the networks is not a prerequisite. I can actually, if I hadn't extended the networks, just pick another network from this dropdown. But if you've extended the networks, you get some of those niceties around not having to change the identity of the workload. That's a huge plus. Now, one of the key selections here is the type of migration, right? So as I had mentioned earlier, if you're choosing a bulk migration, you can actually choose to schedule your switchover, right? So I can actually schedule this migration for next weekend or what have you. Or I can go ahead and choose one of the other migration types. Now, we actually have a 4th migration type, which is cold migration. That's a little less interesting, right? And it's not shown here because this VM is powered on. So, we're not going to power it off just to move it. But what we can do here is we can say, okay, do I want to do a traditional vMotion, or do I want to do the replication-assisted vMotion, right? So if I go ahead and choose my replication-assisted vMotion, because this is moving to my VMware Cloud on AWS target, that's an option for me. I can actually also choose to schedule that because it'll actually sync now and it'll do my vMotion finish in my change window. So that's an option as well. Now, going back to the theme of shifting and transforming, there's also simple options here that are intended to reduce the labor for a given migration, right? So you can actually say, while I'm migrating, I also want to do things like upgrade virtual hardware version or upgrade VMware tools. And this is huge. Even if you're moving from new to new, for example, from 6.5 to 6.7, this is great because it allows you to move the VM without actually impacting the app, but still do things like patching, right? So one of the big use cases for this has been the recent security vulnerabilities, right? Spectre meltdown, et cetera. If you wanted to actually upgrade your hardware version so you can actually get some of the benefits of the patching for security vulnerabilities, you can do that with the check of a box here in the workflow. Now, when I go ahead and click next, you'll see it'll run through a set of validations, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to do a better set of basic things that's going to ensure that, for example, I have enough compute, storage, et cetera, capacity. Now, in the case of vMotion or replication-assisted vMotion, it's also going to exchange kind of version information, et cetera, to ensure that it's compatible to land on the target site, right? If you're trying to vMotion from AMD to Intel, we all know that's not possible. It actually breaks the laws of what the hypervisor can perform. But if I'm moving from, let's say, Intel Sandy Bridge to Intel, Skylake, that's doable. Or like AMD versions, old to new, that's also doable. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish, and that's actually going to kick off our migration. Now, we'll go check on this guy in a few minutes. I also want to step through what else can HCX do, in addition to migration. Now, we talked about HCX being a multi-site solution. Now, where that actually fits in is you may have other auxiliary services and auxiliary policies that go hand in hand with your mobility, right? So you may say, I'm moving my VMs from site A to site B, but I don't want to actually break my protection policies or my backup policies or any of these auxiliary services that are maybe required for compliance. So because HCX is a multi-site solution, you can actually have complex orchestrated workflows that say move from site A to site B and protect the workloads to a third site. So you can actually, even during the course of your migration, minimize the time where you're maybe not DR protected, et cetera. Now, there's a disaster recovery solution that's integrated as part of HCX, and we're actually working with some of our partners in the SRM team, so you can actually use the SRM workflows and runbooks on top of this kind of high-fidelity HCX hybrid highway, the HCX interconnects on the data plane to actually leverage the best of both worlds, if you will. Now, there's some administration tasks as well, because HCX is actually shipped as a product but delivered as a service, and we'll talk about this and why it's important in just a minute. As you can see, there's actually CI/CD where you can actually consume updates directly from our workflows in the HCX manager. So you don't actually need to go through down to my VMware, download these owners bundles, upload them again. You can actually get them from a click of a button. Now you're still the administrator who's controlling this, right? But you're actually getting those streamlined as VMware moves to a more service-based delivery model. So with that, we'll actually jump into a little bit of a deep dive of what's going on.
What happened to the VM?
Oh, we'll come check on that. Actually, it may have already migrated. Let's check on that before we switch over. So it's still running. It'll take a few minutes here, but we'll check on that as we kind of step through some of the deep dive, and we'll come back to this. So what's happening under the hood? As we're actually migrating, we actually have a source site and we have a target site, as we've been alluding to. Now, on our source site, we have basically the HCX manager and we have our legacy vSphere infrastructure, right? NSX may or may not be present. You may have a DVS, you may have standard switch, and you may have a multitude of connectivity models, right? You may have private lines, you may have dark fiber or full 40 gig connectivity between your sites if you're moving, let's say, internal to your data center, pod A to pod B, or you may be moving out to the cloud where you're actually going over the internet. We can actually traverse a multitude of transports and maintain the same operational model and fairness across the sites, right? And so this is actually a function of our HCX interconnects. So we have basically the private lines, we have MPLS connectivity that's abstracted by the WAN facing edge, or it could be just going over the internet. This is also providing us the ability to service chain WAN optimization directly into the pipeline. And this is actually allowing us to get much more efficiency, right? When I'm moving thousands of VMs from my source to my target, and if I have like OSs, right, I have a lot of Linux apps, a lot of Windows apps, I don't want to be sending the same data and the same base OS over and over and over again. So we've actually embedded WAN optimization into this pipeline that's going to give you much more efficient transport. So when you're moving petabytes of data, you can actually do so very successfully as part of your move. And of course, we want to make sure that this is all encrypted in flight, right? So we actually use SweetB crypto as we bootstrap these connectivity model between the sites. So we can actually bootstrap IPsec. We're using SweetB standards for IPsec for kind of a high level of crypto between the sites. Now behind that, we actually have our mobility proxies, if you will, right? So I could have a vMotion proxy, I could have a vSphere replication proxy, or I could have a network extension proxy. These are kind of these hybrid network functions that are service chained behind our cloud gateways on our interconnects that's providing us the ability to abstract those infrastructure components, that's allowing us the ability to give ultimate connectivity between your source and your target. And it's allowing you the ability to kind of go through and ensure that you're not having to impact your applications as you're moving from source to your target. Now, there's, of course, a bunch of even better together features with NSX. If I had NSX on the source side, I can, of course, both extend my VXLAN networks from the source to the target, or I can actually leverage features such as proximity routing. Let's say I have a couple sites that are peered together with something like a BGP or a routing protocol. I can actually leverage NSX so that I can inject host routes so I can get local ingress or egress. So even though my networks are extended, once the VM moves over, I can directly attract the traffic to my target site so that there's no traffic tromboning. These are better together features that we've worked with the NSX team to ensure that even in the course of mobility, you're not actually going to impact your workload networking along the way. So with that, what we'll do is we'll jump into some of the case studies of how our customers are leveraging HCX, and I'll pass that back to Nimisha.
And I won't let you go so easily, Sachin. You have to show the migration.
We'll check on it for sure, yeah.
Okay. So what we heard from Sachin right now, three main things that I heard. NSX is not required at the source, so you can have any kind of switch at the source, and you can get those VMs onto the vSphere on your latest SDDC. Second thing that I noticed is that you can do the migration over internet. Over the bandwidth of 100 meg, you can start migration over straight up on internet. You do not need to wait for months and months of connectivity to set up to do the migration. And the third thing I heard is that you can do migration between different types of vSpheres. So before I go forward with the case study, I want to find out how many of you are looking, or your customers are looking for migration of data center to data center or data center to cloud. How many of you are looking for that? Super. And how many of you had heard about HCX before? Super. So this is a great point at which I would like to introduce you to different customer use cases. This is different real life customers and their feedback. Some of these slides are actually developed, the content, by the people, the customers themselves who have migrated anywhere from 500 to 1,000 or multiple thousands of VMs together. So these are the case studies that I would like to bring forward. How many of you are looking for migration to latest SDDC, looking for modernization, so that I know how much to go in depth on that? May I see how many are looking on-premise to on-premise? Super. And how many are looking for on-premise to cloud, such as VMware Cloud on AWS, IBM Cloud, OVH? Super. So let's spend a little bit more time on VMC as well, and let's go through different use cases. So here are three different use cases that I would like to present. One is the data center extension. If you would like to just go ahead and get the data center extended in such a way that it meets your compliances of on-premises, and you can go ahead and extend it either to cloud or to the latest SDDC, your choice, but such a way that your price per performance of the workload remains pretty low, lower than what it would take you to establish it yourself. Say for instance, I do not know because I'm not from France or Europe myself, but I've heard from customers that if they want to just extend it by one rack capacity, then they have to rent the whole cage and incur the cost of the whole cage to build just one rack. If you come up to that, and if you have to rent and add in OPEX and CAPEX of an extra cage, in such a case, it makes total sense to go ahead and migrate to cloud. Figure out how many VMs, which VMs, and go and save your money straight up with this kind of extension. Second use case that I would like to bring up is data center evacuation or replacement. We have heard of a bunch of hardware issues that show up in the hardware of the infrastructure, and people would need to refresh the hardware or maybe refresh the software. It comes with the cost. It comes with the time that is wasted to build a different data center, to migrate everything onto it, and to replace just doing an upgrade. The OPEX, the amount of cost in labor, in training, tools, to just do the upgrade, the downtime that gets incurred to let people know that we are planning to upgrade. The company's discussion at that point ends up becoming how much is it going to cost me to do the hardware upgrade, to do the hardware refresh. What HCX brings is the complete paradigm shift. Just in the previous session, IHSM was on stage with Alwyn, and here was his slide whereby he said, the presenter Corey, he said that his company was in the discussion to figure out how much is the cost for us to go ahead and do the whole hardware shift, go ahead and replace all the hardware. How much is the cost? How are we going to plan it? How much time is it going to take for us to build a separate data center and do the shift? His timeline for his setup was about, for 1,000 VMs, was up to 18 to 24 months to meet all the requirements to do the complete replacement. And his statement is that once he used HCX to do the migration to cloud, it was done in less than 2 months, and the communication within the company, within the groups, changed from saving the OPEX and CAPEX. And how do we do that? How do we plan? How do we figure out the app dependencies? Which apps do we migrate? When? From that, it shifted to, can we do the migration from 12 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the night? That kind of paradigm shift, that kind of communication shift happens when you use HCX. The third use case I would like to outline, and we are going to go through these use cases a little bit in depth in next few slides, is disaster avoidance. We have had ConnectWise come and present with us at VMworld US. Their use case was, we have a disaster upon us and we would like to do the migration. And let's look at all these use cases a little bit in depth. Let's start with the one that was the first one that we worked with. They wanted to improve their TCO. This was a university, and they wanted to be at the edge of the technology. They wanted to be at the highest possible peak in technology and try it out themselves. In the process, they wanted to make sure that they had minimal lock-in. They wanted to have a long-term solution for SaaS instead of a small one. And they were looking for lift and shift. Guess what we provided them? We gave them shift and transform the whole network. So they went ahead, and what did they achieve with us? They went from on-prem to latest SDDC to cloud, a legacy cloud. From there, they shifted 2,600 VMs, right? Here we are talking about 2,600 VMs, multiple 500 terabit of data, that is half petabyte of data, getting shifted from legacy on-premises to the modernized DC to a legacy hardware, a legacy cloud. From that, back to on-premises, and then back to the cloud. They did multiple transition of thousands of VMs each time successfully. They did that within the time frame that they were looking for and with zero downtime almost. Or I would say downtime as per what they had planned or less than that. They did it quickly and they freed up their resource and saved on their OPEX and CAPEX equally well. And they did all this in very short time with minimal risk to their own network. Now, if they did not have cloud, let's pause here for a few seconds and let's think about what they have achieved. And if they did not have HCX, if they did not have a migration tool such as this, what would they have had incurred? They would have had spent multi-million dollars of consultancy, expenditure, training the people for the migration, training them for different tools, and they would have had disrupted their operation in order to do lift and shift with a different kind of mechanism. They would not have been able to simply, in their words, they would not have been able to move so many times to different environments exactly as they wanted within the time frame that they were looking for. So those are the few highlights that I would like to bring up for this particular solution, where they evacuated a data center and they went ahead and did the extension at the same time.
One quick comment about this specific customer as well was that they have actually gone through and done an HCX migration twice now. And of course, when they're doing it the first time, they're learning the tech, they're migrating, but kind of going back to the theme from earlier, this is actually a repeating process, right? And as you potentially have multiple cloud vendors, or you're trying to balance basically how much do you put in your own private cloud, or how much do you put in, one of the service provider partners, maybe into public cloud, et cetera, this is actually a tool that helps you kind of level the playing field from that perspective. And as you can see in the last comment here, their second migration, because they had already created those operational practices, was that much more efficient. So that was actually something that was very insightful here, as it allowed them to balance both from their private cloud perspective, and I think they were leveraging VMware Cloud on AWS for their other public cloud endpoint in this scenario.
Thanks a lot for the comment, Sachin. I think it's a great comment. I would like to take one point out of what he said, multi-cloud. What he's talking about is customers being able to be on different clouds together. With the abstraction that HCX provides, you can have some VMs living on VMC and using the services that AWS provides, and you are on cloud and you are using the services of AWS. In future, we may be supporting multiple different clouds. Maybe right now we have IBM and OVH as a cloud. You can have some VMs living on IBM and OVH and using the management and the services IBM provides. You basically are abstracting your infrastructure completely with HCX, and your apps are oblivious of where exactly what all it's getting from which cloud. And that's the multi-cloud vision or the journey that we work on and walk on with our customers together to make their cases be successful. So this is one of the examples that we had. The next example I would like to talk about is disaster avoidance. In US, we hear of storm coming in at Florida quite often. Level 3 storm coming in, level 5 storm coming in 3 weeks, and there is going to be disaster. The problem with those kind of scenarios is when it hits, all the people of that region are also expected to evacuate. Yeah, you may have disaster recovery as a solution, but somebody needs to be there to initiate the disaster recovery. Here, this particular customer, what they did was, when they got the warning that there is going to be level 5 storm, they decided to migrate all of their workloads to a region in Texas where there is no such hurricanes coming in, no such storms being there. So they went ahead and they were told that they need to do the migration. There is a natural disaster coming in, and please do the migration without disrupting anything. Now this is a customer we had not heard of, and they suddenly came about and they said, hey, we want to use HCX services, we want to know who you are. We started from there the day they heard about the natural disaster and their mandate to move to avoid the disaster. So this is not disaster recovery per se, this is disaster avoidance. And disaster containment is another scenario where we can be applicable as well. So with this, the solution requirements that they had was their traffic should not be disrupted. They needed to have bulk migration of virtual machines for that, and they wanted to do it without replacing or upgrading or anything of that sort. With this, they went ahead and they did this migration in the time frame that they had. They went ahead and they moved to, as what it says, they went ahead and did the migration before the disaster hit them. And their setup was in typical, one-to-one redundancy for complete high availability. And here they are. They finished all of their migration out of Tampa to Dallas within given time frame, within given budget that they had, and avoided the disaster completely.
One quick comment about this specific scenario as well, and just tying it back to some of the technology that we were looking at, is if you look at a feature like replication-assisted vMotion, right? We all know vSphere replication and how it's being used for some of seeding of the data, and that's really your true DR scenario. What we've seen is actually this confluence of the market where you're seeing, backup and DR and mobility all kind of converge into one solution, if you will, right? And so if you think of a solution like disaster avoidance, it can either be proactive or reactive. And when we look at it in this scenario, it was kind of a proactive move to avoid, let's say, an oncoming hurricane, whereas it could be reactive as well, right? Let's say it was an earthquake or a power outage and you lost your data center. Since your data is already replicated, that's just a traditional disaster recovery scenario. Whereas if it's proactive and you say, okay, I suspect something's happening, or maybe my infrastructure, I'm seeing alerts in my NOC dashboard, I can just do a vMotion finish with the replication-assisted vMotion, and effectively I get the same behavior, but no downtime to the app. So there's really kind of a convergence of the space here as we're seeing DR and mobility kind of end up effectively at the same landing ground, which is the VM needs to end up on the target site, either in a planned or unplanned fashion, hopefully planned.
Thank you, Sachin. And here is a case of DC modernization. So this is the customer which wanted to be, it had legacy on-premises data center. They wanted to have the private cloud, as well as they wanted to move some of the traffic, some of their VMs onto public cloud. So they wanted to use all the three different types of clouds and data centers. And here is an example of how they migrated from on-premises to latest SDDC. Their business mandate, their challenge was to improve and retire improve the customer experience and retire the legacy data sites and modernize the infrastructure in the process. Their key requirements were to migrate from legacy hardware to the latest SDDCs that you may have. And they wanted to do that from different kinds of switches. They had NSX, Cisco switches and whatnot, and they wanted to move the architecture to NSX. The way HCX did that is by reducing their complexity and helping them with the operations. They had no service impact, none whatsoever, when they did their migration. And they had multiple security and multiple fault domains, and we had to manage all of that. We worked with these customers for 5 months, and we helped them do this migration. So we went ahead and did the migration of 500 VMs, 4 vBlocks, 120 terabit of data, and 80 VLANs. This was a complex scenario where they had multiple firewalls, and we had to jump over different firewalls to do this migration. Imagine if you had to do that without HCX, you would be upgrading and figuring out ways of going through all of these firewalls to pass through and execute your things within 3 months to do the complete migration. Sachin, would you like to add
this was an interesting scenario. Actually, personally, I'd worked with this customer, and they've actually were leveraging our partners in IBM as a system integrator and leveraging the IBM cloud. This was American Airlines, and of course, as you know, if they're operating an airline, this was running AmericanAirlines.com. It was running their kiosk terminals. It was running all their cargo applications, very important applications for their business, basically. And they were doing a couple transformations as part of their move, right? So they were trying to modernize onto the latest SADC, but they were doing so from legacy V blocks that were running Cisco Nexus 1000 Vs, some old gear back from old CPU versions, etc., on their B200 chassis, and they were trying to modernize into the latest cloud infrastructure. In parallel, they actually had a physical DR site, right? And this physical DR site was being basically virtualized and being moved as a DR site into another SDDC. So this was actually multiple transformations that were occurring as part of their modernization. So kind of coming back to the shift and transform, this is actually a prototypical example of that. They're moving to a combination of cloud, that's in public cloud into IBM, and private cloud, and they're modernizing their infrastructure while also keeping their auxiliary services such as DR. This is actually a public reference, and I think we have a link here if folks want to reference it or read up more about the American Airlines scenario.
So at the end of the slide, there is a public link. You can go ahead and look at it, and you will be able to read all the things that we have done for this customer. As I already mentioned, they had WAN overlays. They had to traverse through multiple firewalls, which are normal cases. We see a lot of load balancers and firewalls at different customers, and they are concerned about migration because of that. So here is the information on how did we help them migrate. So how do you get HCX? We have 4 routes to market for HCX. One is for public cloud. VMware offers VMware Cloud on AWS. It is inbuilt for free for our customers of VMC. You can do migration to VMC using HCX without spending any extra money. Second, we are into the VCF. We are partner with VCFs for private and public cloud within VMware. So VMware Cloud Foundation, we are bundled into their product as well. The third way we are available, our services are available for private cloud to for on-premises to latest SDDC migration is through NSX Enterprise Plus license. It is included as part of that license. So once you have license, you can do the migration with that. The fourth place where you can get HCX right now is through our various VCPP partners, IBM, OVH. Let me just put out a slide to show you which all partners that we have right now. So we are here with Rackspace, Fujitsu, NTT, and so on Japan side. Every day we are adding more number of partners onto our portfolio. And the reason why we are selective about how we are adding the partners is because we want to make sure that our customers get the best of the service. If you look at NTT has 7 clouds of themselves. So more than helping their own customers, they can help do migration within their company as well, and they use HCX for that as well. Some of the top use cases that we hear from these partners are same as what we hear from our direct customers that we work with for VMC or for Enterprise Plus migration, which are the DC consolidation, DC extension, hardware refresh, software refresh, DR related issues, and burst capacity. So here are the use cases that we have. With this, we are done with our prepared remarks, what we wanted to present.
Should we check back on that demo quickly?
I was about to ask you that. Let's see if it has succeeded.
So I didn't want to just have any dead air time, but that VM did indeed make it over successfully, and we just did one VM because it was the course of few gigs of data that we moved in, I think, 15 minutes. There's a set of operational tooling and all of that as well that's, comes along with HCX. So we have management packs and vRealize operations. We have an integration with Log Insight for, syslog emitters and, managing to make sure tunnels are up and all of that along the way. If you'd actually like to check out HCX and get your hands on the product, there's actually a great workflow in the hands-on lab that I would recommend. that folks check out, and it's Lab 1981. And actually, there's an expert-led workshop for the HOL on Thursday at, I believe, 11:30 that I would recommend you check out if you have a few minutes. And so with that, we'll open up for Q&A, and we'll take any questions. We do have a few sessions as well that kind of cover, the other HCX sessions. And I definitely would encourage folks to take the survey as well. You think you can take this QR code or take the survey in the VMworld app to go into, give us any feedback that you may have. So with that, open it up for questions.
Please go ahead.
Hello. My name is Thierry Chambron from Orange Business Services. If your source private cloud is leveraging PKS with containers on it, Arbor registry, or things like VRA with many coded orchestration stacks, then how does HCX behave to migrate all this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So around that front, if you had VRA, if you had PKS, it's your traditional kind of scenario where you have maybe multiple endpoints, and when you're doing something like a migration, you want to make sure that you're not creating an issue in the database of a management layer above, right? Be it a VRA, or let's say you were having Pivotal manage, the PKS solution manage, let's say, some of the applications. So there's actually a set of pre-callback and post-callback workflows that can be executed to ensure that there's integration. So we've had many large customers actually leveraging VRA, et cetera, leverage HCX as well. And so let's say they're moving between maybe two endpoints and they're moving their entire blueprint over, they can ensure that the VRA blueprint is consistent and they're not losing the handles to those workloads, right? Because you're moving from, let's say, vCenter A to B, your MoRefs, et cetera, are changing. So there's integration there as well that you can call out into the VRA workflows to ensure that they're consistent.
There was a question in the front. Can he have the mic, please?
Hello. I want to understand if HCX works with standard DR software, like SRM or Zelto. Does it work with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is actually kind of everything we've shown here today is actually generally available. We're actually working with both of actually these partners. So there's actually mechanisms that you can leverage basically around, when this integration goes live, you can leverage the pipelines and the workflows for, let's say, an SRM or a Zerto DR along the HCX pipeline. So that's something that's in the works and coming soon.
Yes, so please watch out on what we announce very soon sometime. Yes, please go ahead.
Could you use it instead of SRM?
So just to repeat the question was if HCX can be used instead of SRM. They're really kind of providing different solutions. So HCX, it's leveraging the same vSphere application tech under the hood, right? Now, where SRM excels is around the runbooks, around the manageability, kind of your protection groups, et cetera.
Audit.
And where HCX excels is actually around this any-to-any migration, around the kind of when-optimized data plane. So they're really kind of operating at different planes. Now, if you want just kind of to actually have disaster recovery and you're not interested in the runbooks, absolutely. Where you can actually use this SRM and HCX integration that I was alluding to just earlier, which is coming soon, is actually if you want to leverage those runbooks and that high-fidelity data plane for the any-to-any version kind of in conjunction. So that's where they're better together.
Hi. Question regarding the network extension.
Sure.
There are some clouds like, for example, IBM SoftLayer, which is working on, I would say, his own network settings and the configuration. How the HCX is reacting on this kind of connections? How it's extending? Is it possible to extend the network when the SoftLayer is quite specific requirements with networking?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So the question I think was, how is HCX layer 2 extension working in cloud providers, let's say like the IBM cloud, SoftLayer, where there's specific infrastructure hoops that you must go through to ensure that you can interoperate. So that's actually a good question. Now, one interesting thing what HCX offers, it allows us to actually tunnel over the top. So we actually have the ability, let's say in soft layer, to traverse the Viatas, I believe, that are being leveraged, or the Fortinets. There's a couple of different configs that are available. As long as we have that IP capability, we're actually doing a UDP in cap. So we're getting layer 3 end to end. So we're actually getting ability to actually extend over, you're doing layer 2 over layer 3. So we can actually traverse whichever fabric. Once we land in your target landing pad, we're able to bridge together, let's say, maybe VLANs from your source side into an NSX, VXLAN on the target side. You get a single broadcast domain traversing the HCX layer 2 concentrators over that pipeline, and still are able to traverse, let's say, the service provider infrastructure. And of course, that also goes for, let's say, if you're having to traverse NAT or do all of the other kind of jugglery that may be required to actually go through a specific provider infrastructure or your source infrastructure on premise, right? One other key thing actually along those lines is that it's always source side initiated, right? So if you're an enterprise, you don't want to actually have any cloud providers reaching back into your infrastructure. So it's always source initiated. So that's something as well that's important from a security perspective. Oftentimes, as you're kind of connecting out to the cloud, even though you're extending layer 2, you're kind of the source of truth that's administering that.
So with this, we'll end the session. We are here. If you have any, I'll take one last question.
Okay,
I'm getting signal to end, but we'll take one more question, please.
Thank you. Is it possible to use HCX for continuous replication and in the disaster case to just switch over?
Yes, that's actually a good scenario. That's actually the scenario I was alluding to with the replication-assisted vMotion, right? And that's kind of the convergence of disaster recovery and disaster avoidance, right? So kind of saying, okay, I'm continuously replicating. That's kind of traditional DR, if you will. And then, I need to pull a trigger and basically say, I want to migrate. Instead of disaster recovery, now I'm doing, disaster avoidance or migration, I guess, if you will, right? So, yes, absolutely.
But if you want your audit and run books and all that, you probably you want SRM in that case.
No, they're slightly separate. This is actually, that's another layer above. Okay. This is actually at the data plane level. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end the session right now, but we are here, so please feel free to come and ask us a question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for attending at lunchtime, guys.
Thank you.